Welcome to His Eternal Diary. The betrayal at the center of this story isn't the mother, though she deserves every word written about her. The deepest cut is this. A woman watched a man she claimed to love get slowly dismantled, chose silence every single time, and then had the audacity to call it his fault when he finally left. What he did next was not fueled by anger. You'll understand why by the end. The coffee in my hand had gone cold. I was sitting in my car outside the building where Isolda and I had once spent a Sunday afternoon choosing paint swatches. A pale gray she'd liked for the living room, a warm cream I'd preferred for the hallway. We'd compromised on both. That felt like a long time ago now, and I wasn't sure the word compromise meant what either of us had thought it meant. I wasn't there to revisit anything. I had a document in my jacket pocket, and I needed to drop it off with a notary before noon. That was all. Some things don't need a ceremony. You just do them and then you drive away, and the morning continues around you the same as it would have otherwise. I'll start at the beginning because the beginning matters. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. The beginning was quiet. I like most things that eventually become disasters. You don't see them coming because they look, at first, like luck. I met Isolde at a gallery event in the spring. One of those evenings where the lighting is designed to make everyone look more interesting than they are, where the wine is decent and the conversation is not, and where most people are attending in the hope that someone more interesting than them will arrive. I was there because a colleague had passed me a spare ticket. I'd almost given it away. She was standing in front of a large canvas, dark blues, a slash of amber through the center, with her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to it. She wasn't performing contemplation. She was actually doing it. That was the first thing I noticed about her. Not her appearance. Oh, though that came a moment later and it registered fully. The first thing was that she seemed genuinely absorbed, not checking her phone, not scanning the room for someone more useful to talk to. Just present. There is a specific quality to people who are present. It reads differently in a room than any kind of conventional attractiveness, and it tends to outlast it. I walked over and said something unremarkable about the painting. She disagreed with my interpretation politely, and then precisely, and then she smiled and said, "But I could be wrong." She was not, as it turned out, wrong, but the fact that she allowed for the possibility, I found that interesting in a way I couldn't quite file. We talked for an hour and a half. She had a way of asking questions that was direct without being interrogative. She was curious about what you thought, and she let you finish the thought before she responded, which sounds like a minor thing but is rarer than it should be. We covered the painting, then modern art more broadly, then architecture, then the way cities organize themselves around money, which was a subject I knew something about professionally, and by the time I'd finished talking about it, I realized I'd been going for 10 minutes and she was still listening. We exchanged numbers at the end of the evening. I texted her the next morning, which is something I almost never do. I have a habit of letting things breathe. But something about the conversation felt worth not waiting on. Her name was Isolda. She ran her own small interior design studio, which she'd built from nothing over 4 years. She was proud of it in the way people are proud of things they've actually earned, matter-of-factly, without needing you to acknowledge it. I liked that about her. I liked that she'd made something and was still making it, still refining it, still waking up in the morning with something specific to work toward. She was also funny in a way that was entirely internal, dry, slightly oblique, the kind of humor that assumes you'll keep up and doesn't pause to check. I kept up. I think that mattered to her. What I did not know on that first evening was that she had a mother. Everyone has a mother, obviously, but not everyone's mother is Rowena. The first 3 months were the cleanest months. I want to record that because when I talk about what came later, I don't want to suggest the whole thing was compromised from the start. It wasn't. The first 3 months had a quality I haven't found easy to describe, the specific lightness of something beginning well, before you know what it's going to cost. We went to markets on Saturday mornings and argued about whether good coffee required inconvenience. We went to exhibitions, and she told me things about composition and use of negative space that I didn't know, but that lodged somewhere useful. She came to a Hargrove work event with me and navigated it with complete ease, which meant more to me than I showed. I cooked for her twice, and she was honest about the results, which I preferred to flattery. We talked about her father. He had died 2 years before I met her. A cardiac event, sudden, no warning. She described him with the specific quietness of someone who is still processing, who hasn't finished yet. He had been steady and funny and precise, she said. An engineer. He had built things. She believed you could tell everything about a person from what they did with a problem, whether they avoided it or went toward it. He had always gone toward it. I thought about that later, about what it meant that she'd described her father that way, and what it said about what she was looking for. I didn't meet Rowena until we'd been together about 3 months. Isolda mentioned her often, always warmly, always with that particular blend of love and mild exhaustion that suggested a relationship of real complexity. My mom called again, she'd say, and there would be something in her voice I couldn't name yet. An adjustment, a very small one, like someone quietly moving furniture to make room for something large. I told myself it was just closeness. Lots of people are close to their mothers. I had no reason to read it as anything else. The evening I met Rowena was a Sunday. Isolde had cooked. She was a genuinely good cook, one of those people who can make a meal from almost nothing and have it taste considered. She'd made a lamb dish with a sauce that had been in my head since the first time she made it. The table was set. There was wine. Isolda had changed twice before the evening started, which I noted and did not mention. Rowena arrived 20 minutes early. I registered that immediately. Not because I'm precious about punctuality, but because Isolde's whole demeanor changed the moment she heard the buzzer. Something tensed in her. Her shoulders moved. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs for a brief moment, which was something I'd noticed she did when she was steeling herself for something. Then she opened the door and she was smiling, and the smile was real. Her love for her mother was real, I never doubted that, but there was something underneath it that I couldn't name. A held note. The expression of a person who has been waiting for something to start so they can manage it. Rowena walked in and filled the room. That's the only way I can describe it. She wasn't loud, she wasn't aggressive. She was impeccably dressed and well-spoken and carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who has never once doubted their own authority in any situation they've entered. She was in her mid-60s, slender, with Isolda's coloring and a way of looking at you that felt like an assessment being conducted at speed. She looked at me that way. "Callum," she said, as though she was confirming something she'd already decided. Not a greeting, a verdict. "Rowena," I said, "it's good to finally meet you." She smiled. "I've heard so much about you." She hadn't, as it turned out. Isolda had told her almost nothing. I only found that out later, and by then I understood why. Isolda had been managing the introduction, keeping me at a distance from her mother's scrutiny for as long as she could, which told me she already knew what that scrutiny looked like, and didn't want me to experience it before I'd had a chance to care enough to withstand it. Dinner was fine on the surface. The food was good. The conversation moved through the standard channels. What I did for work, where I was from, what I thought of the city. Rowena asked questions with the efficiency of someone conducting an interview. She didn't ask follow-up questions that suggested genuine interest. She asked questions that were really checkboxes, establishing coordinates. I answered them honestly and without a performance. I had nothing to perform. What I noticed, eating that dinner, was this. Rowena addressed most of her conversation to Isolda. She spoke to me when she had a specific question, but her natural orientation in the room was toward her daughter. The two of them had a shorthand, references I wasn't privy to, a running commentary on people and events I didn't know, and I found myself sometimes sitting outside a conversation I was technically inside. I told myself this was just unfamiliarity. I was new, of course I didn't know the references yet. Give it time. And it was only afterward, when Isolda was in the kitchen and Rowena and I were briefly alone, that I got a clearer signal. "She's been through a great deal," Rowena said. She was looking at the painting Isolda had hung on the wall across from the window, one of Isolda's own pieces, something she'd painted during a difficult year, all blues and grays and one careful line of yellow that looked almost accidental but wasn't. "I imagine she's told you about her father." "She has," I said. "It sounds like he was remarkable." "He was," Rowena said. "To both of us." She paused. "She doesn't recover quickly from loss. She takes things very deeply. That can be a complication for the people around her. I wasn't sure what to do with that. It felt like a warning, but it was dressed like a confidence. And I said that I thought Isolda seemed to handle difficulty with a great deal of grace. Rowena looked at me then. The full assessment again. Yes, she said. She does, with the right support. And then Isolde came back in with coffee, and the conversation moved elsewhere. I replayed that exchange on the drive home. I couldn't find anything concretely wrong with it. Everything Rowena had said was defensible as maternal concern. But there had been something in the texture of it. The implication that Isolda was fragile, that she needed handling, that the support she required came with a specific shape, and that the shape was something Rowena had already defined. That I filed away without yet knowing what folder it belonged in. I didn't say anything to Isolda that night. I didn't want to manufacture a problem from a feeling. I was aware that first impressions of people's parents are often distorted by the awkward geometry of that particular social situation. Everyone on display, everyone slightly performing. I gave it room. The problem was it didn't get better. Over the following months, I began to see the shape of it more clearly. Rowena called Isolde every day, sometimes twice. The calls were never short. I noticed that Isolda would sometimes take them in another room, and when she came back, she'd have that adjustment in her posture again. Something recalibrated, something repositioned. She'd be thinking about something she wasn't saying. The conversation in the room would resume, but something in her attention had been redirected. I started to pay attention the way I pay attention at work, systematically, without annotation, just observation. But the first concrete incident happened about 7 months in. Isolde and I had planned a weekend trip, a long weekend in the countryside, just the two of us, 3 nights in a converted farmhouse I'd booked because she'd mentioned once that she'd always wanted to stay somewhere with actual land around it, somewhere you could hear actual silence. She'd lit up when I showed her the booking. We'd paid the deposit. We'd discussed what we'd do and what we'd bring and which books we were going to read. 3 weeks before we were due to go, Rowena announced she was redoing her spare bedroom and needed help choosing furniture. Isolda came to me the evening after this announcement with a look I was beginning to recognize. Apologetic, but not entirely apologetic. Already decided, but presenting it as a question. Mashoki says she can't do it without me, Isolda said. You know how she is with decisions since Dad died. I did know. I'd been told several times about the difficulty Rowena had with decisions since Isolde's father died. It had, in the months since I'd heard it first, been cited in relation to choosing a new car, repainting her hallway, deciding whether to replace her boiler before winter, and enrolling in a watercolor class at the community center. The decisions, I had noted, were always Rowena's. The help required was always Isolda's. It's just a weekend, Isolda said. We can go another time. I looked at her. I thought about saying several things. I thought about saying, this is a pattern and we need to name it. I thought about saying, if we cancel this time, we'll cancel the next time too. Maybe what I said was, okay. That was the first time I said okay when I meant something else. We rebooked. The second booking also didn't happen. A different reason that time. Also Rowena adjacent, though the specifics varied and the pattern was the same. We eventually went on the trip 4 months after we'd originally planned it, and by then something about it had changed in a way I couldn't fully name. We were there, and it was good, and the silence was exactly what I'd hoped for. But there was a slight awareness underneath the good, like a sound too low to identify, the awareness that we had almost not come, and that the almost had been decided by someone not in the room with us. I told myself these were minor disruptions. I told myself every relationship has friction with extended family, that it was a matter of navigation. That patience was not capitulation. I was good at patience. I'd grown up in a house where the adults dealt with difficulty by going quiet and thinking, not by performing reaction. I could sit with a problem for a long time without needing to act on it. I could watch and hold what I'd watched and let it accumulate into something coherent before I named it. What I was watching over the next year was this. Every time Isolde and I reached a point of greater intimacy, a difficult conversation resolved well, a new level of trust established between us, a plan made that felt like progress, something would happen that pulled her back. Not away from me, exactly. Sideways, into orbit around her mother. Rowena would have a health scare, minor always a slightly elevated blood pressure reading at a routine checkup, a twinge in her knee that a physiotherapist dismissed within a week, a bad stretch of insomnia she mentioned once, and then 3 more times. Each one was reported to Isolda with the full weight of a crisis. Each one required Isolda's presence, her management, her time, and her worry. Isolda would go. Every time, she would go. Rowena was not, I think, consciously malicious in this. I want to be accurate about that because the accurate version is more important than the simpler one. She was not sitting in her house with a calendar, planning which weekend to destabilize. What she was doing was something more instinctive and in some ways more difficult to argue with. She was consuming. She had a need for closeness, for relevance, for the particular comfort of being central to her daughter's life, and she fed it without examining it. The loss of her husband had intensified this. She had turned toward Isolda like a plant toward a window, and she turned so completely and so consistently that she didn't notice or didn't care that she was blocking the light from everything else. And Isolda let her. That was the thing I kept coming back to. That was the thing I couldn't reason away or improve with more patience. Rowena's behavior was what it was, a thing I could map and understand, and if I chose to, adjust around. But Isolda's response to it was a choice. Every time she answered the call instead of letting it go. Every time she rearranged our plans without a real conversation first. Every time she explained her mother's needs to me as though they were weather. Unavoidable, impersonal, something you simply accounted for and moved on. She was choosing. Meanon, I raised it carefully. I said I felt like our time was often the first thing to be renegotiated when her mother had a need. I said I thought we needed to be more protective of our commitments to each other. I used the language of partnership because that's what I genuinely believed in. Not leverage, not ultimatum, just the honest statement of what I needed. She heard me. She apologized. She agreed. And then the next thing would happen, and the pattern would hold, and I'd find myself standing in the same room with a slightly different version of the same problem. We moved in together 14 months after we met. The apartment was one she'd been renting for 2 years before I arrived. I gave up my own place and moved into hers. See it, which was a decision I made without fully examining what it meant to step into someone else's established geography. Her space, her systems, her existing arrangements, including the ones I wasn't yet aware of. In retrospect, that was the first material decision I made without thinking carefully enough. I want to note that. Not because of the apartment itself. It was a good place, and we made it into something together over time. But because the decision not to find somewhere neutral, somewhere that belonged to us both from the start, gave the existing architecture a precedence I would feel later. Rowena had a key to Isolde's apartment. I discovered this on the 3rd week after I'd moved in, when I came home from work early on a Thursday afternoon and found Rowena in our kitchen, reorganizing the refrigerator. Oh, she looked up at me without particular surprise. "The produce drawer was collecting moisture," she said. "I've reorganized it." I stood there. The refrigerator door was open. Items I had bought and placed with my own logic were now in different locations. The kitchen smelled faintly of the cleaning products she'd used on the produce drawer. "I didn't know you'd be coming by today," I said. "I like to check in on the place," she said, turning back to her work. "I've been doing it for years." "You have a key," I said. "Isolde gave it to me when she first moved in case of emergency." A reorganized refrigerator was not an emergency. I waited. She didn't acknowledge that. I called Isolda when I was back in the car, running an errand I'd invented to give myself space to think. "Your mother is at the apartment," I said. "Oh," she said. "Oh, right. She mentioned she might pop by." "She has a key." "I know. She's had it for ages." "Are you planning to ask for it back now that we're living there together?" A pause. Then, "Callum, she's not going to be there all the time." "That's not what I asked." Silence. "She's used to being able to come," Isolde said, and I could hear the calibration in her voice, the careful threading of 2 incompatible loyalties. "She means well." "I'm sure she does," I said. "But she's reorganizing our kitchen without asking either of us. I'd like to discuss having a boundary there." "I'll talk to her," Isolda said. She did talk to her. Rowena did not return the key. In the following month, she came by twice more while I happened to be home. Once to drop off flowers she'd grown, and once to measure a window for curtains she'd decided to make for us without being asked. Both times with a key. Both times the visit complete in itself, requiring nothing from me but my presence and my tolerance. I raised it again with Isolda. She understood what I said, Isolda told me. She's not abusing it. Does she know that? I said. Let it go, Isolda said, and there it was. The first time those words arrived in direct form, without the dressing of concern or explanation. Just, let it go. I looked at her for a moment, then I let it go. And I went back to watching. The engagement happened in the second year. I proposed because I genuinely wanted to marry her. That has to be said clearly, because when I tell this story in full, it can sound like a man walking into something he already knew was wrong. And that is not what happened. Although I was in love with Isolda in a specific and grounded way. I loved her intelligence, the particular quality of her humor, the way she moved through her work with a seriousness that was also generosity. She thought hard about the spaces she was creating and what they would mean to the people inside them. I loved the ordinary texture of our life together. I wanted more of it. I went toward the proposal with my eyes as open as I knew how to have them. She said yes. She cried. One of the few times I saw her cry. And the crying was real, and so was the joy underneath it. We went to dinner and sat across from each other, and the evening had a charge to it that I still think about sometimes. The specific combination of certainty and aliveness that comes from deciding something big and having the decision feel right. We called her mother that night. I watched Isolde make the call from across the table. I watched her face while she spoke. The adjustment was subtle. It was always subtle. But I saw it. She's so happy, Isolda said when she hung up. She cried too. Good, I said. Rowena called back 3 times that evening with thoughts about the wedding. We had not yet discussed the wedding between ourselves. We hadn't had a single conversation about what we wanted, about size, style, feel, any of it. The ring was still new on Isolde's hand, but Rowena had thoughts. Venues, timing, which of Isolde's cousins would be hurt not to be bridesmaids, the budget relative to what Isolde's aunt had spent on her own daughter's wedding 3 years earlier. I watched Isolda take the 3rd call. I watched her get a notepad. Oh, so that was the first night I understood clearly that the wedding was not going to be something Isolde and I designed together. It was going to be something that happened in the space between Rowena's specifications and Isolda's negotiations of them. I was going to be asked to have opinions that could be overruled and to fund decisions I hadn't made. I said nothing that night. But the way I was holding the situation changed. Over the following 8 months, the wedding planning became the primary arena in which Rowena's presence expanded. I had expected some version of this. The mother of the bride effect is well documented, but the scale of it was beyond anything I'd modeled. Rowena had opinions about everything: venue, catering, flowers, invitations, the color of the groomsmen's ties. I don't know whether it was appropriate to have a DJ, or whether a DJ was, as she put it, a bit much. She communicated these opinions through Isolda, almost never directly to me, which meant every decision arrived already pre-processed through a conversation I hadn't been part of. By the time I was consulted, the shape of the thing had often already been established. My own preferences, for a smaller event, for something with less ceremony and more actual gathering, for a budget that didn't require us to deplete the savings we'd been building toward a house, were heard, logged, and gradually dissolved through a process that felt like negotiation, but was actually erosion. The guest list was where it became explicit. We had talked early on about keeping things to around 80 people. Oh, as I'd been clear that I thought the cost per meaningful conversation ratio deteriorated badly beyond a certain size. You ended up spending your wedding day managing the event rather than being present in it. Isolda had agreed. We'd shaken hands on it, metaphorically. Rowena's list, when it arrived, had 60 names on it alone. She just wants everyone to be there, Isolda said. 80 total, I said. We agreed. I know we agreed, Isolda said, and the frustration in her was visible. Directed at me, I noticed, not at the problem. But these are people she's known for decades. It would hurt her to cut them. I understand that, I said. It would also hurt me to go several £1,000s over budget on a guest list I had no say in. It's not several thousand. At the per head cost, it's exactly that, I said. I know what the venue quoted us. She went quiet. I'll talk to her, she said. The final guest list had 140 people on it. I attended my own wedding planning as a largely consultative presence. Present in the room, occasionally asked for input, ultimately decorative. I don't want to present myself as passive. I raised it. I had the conversations. I said clearly, more than once, that the process wasn't working for me, that I felt like an observer in decisions I was financially underwriting. Isolda heard me every time. She agreed with me, often in the moment, and then she went and had the conversation with her mother and came back with a version of the outcome that was Rowena's, and the next time would be the same. Finally, what I realized during the wedding planning was something I needed to look at directly. Isolda did not fight for me, not in the ways that mattered. She would hear my position, agree with it, carry it to her mother, and return with Rowena's version. This was not stupidity, and it was not weakness. It was a very specific and consistent choice not to spend her political capital on me. Or, and this is the version I eventually settled on as more accurate, she didn't have political capital to spend. She was so completely governed by the need to keep her mother satisfied that there was nothing left over for the actual partnership. I talked to Elliot about it. Elliot had been my closest friend since we were 22, a solicitor who'd gone into commercial law, a precise thinker and a careful listener, and a man who gave advice only when asked and gave it straight when he did. He was the only person in my life I talked to without editing myself. Does she know she's doing it? He asked. I think she does, and she doesn't, I said. Like someone who knows a habit is bad but doesn't connect the habit to the damage it's causing. Have you told her what it's costing? I've tried, I said. She hears me. She doesn't act on it. That's the part that matters. Elliot said. I know, I said. He was quiet for a moment. The restaurant around us had that particular Thursday evening sound. Not quiet, not loud, just the backdrop of other people's ordinary lives. What are you going to do? He asked. I'm going to pay attention, I said, and I'm going to start being careful. It was around this time, roughly 18 months into the relationship, about 4 months before the wedding, that I made the first practical decision. I need to explain my professional background here because it matters to what I did and how I did it. I worked as a portfolio manager at Hargrove Capital. I had been there 6 years, and I was good at the work in the specific way that comes from actually liking it. I liked the problem solving of it, the requirement to stay precise under conditions designed to make you imprecise. I understood financial structures, how assets move, how they're protected, how they're exposed. I understood what happens to money when relationships end, and I understood it not abstractly, but in the granular way that comes from watching it happen to other people professionally. I had not been careless with our shared finances, but I had not been fully protective either. I'd been operating on the assumption of permanence, the way you do when you're building something. When that assumption started to show cracks, I began to look at what I'd left exposed. Here is what I found when I looked. Isolda and I had a joint savings account that we both contributed to monthly, the house deposit fund. It had been accumulating for 9 months and held a meaningful amount. The account was structured, as joint accounts typically are, so that either of us could withdraw from it without the other's consent. I had never questioned this because I hadn't been thinking about it in adversarial terms. I had also, 6 months prior, agreed in principle, verbally, not in writing, to act as guarantor for a business loan Isolde was considering for her studio. It was Rowena who had suggested it. Isolde had brought it to me as a good idea, and I had said yes without examining the specifics carefully, because I was still in the mode where I said yes to things. The loan had not yet been finalized. The paperwork had not been signed, but the expectation had been set, and expectations of that kind have a particular momentum. Third, I had taken out a life insurance policy the previous year and listed Isolde as the primary beneficiary, standard for someone at my stage of life in a committed relationship. I hadn't thought about what that meant if the relationship ended because I hadn't been thinking about the relationship ending. And fourth, we had been looking at properties together. We hadn't yet made an offer, but we had viewed 6 apartments, had a working budget, had spoken to a mortgage broker. Although the implicit assumption was that whatever we bought would be a joint purchase. None of this was unusual. All of it was exactly what 2 people in a committed relationship planning a future would naturally do. But when I looked at it through the lens of what I was beginning to understand about our situation, it looked different. It looked like a set of positions I had taken without fully accounting for where the relationship might go. I had a long dinner with Elliot. I laid it out for him, the whole picture, clearly, without interpretation. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued about him. "The guarantor thing," he said. "Don't sign it." "I know. If the loan goes into default, and given what you're describing about how that studio is actually being run, yet with someone who has no financial accountability making operational decisions, she's involved in everything," I said. "Not formally, but in practice." "Then the risk profile is elevated beyond what you'd normally accept," he said. "You're being asked to carry liability for a business where you don't have visibility and where a third party has influence. Don't guarantee it." "I won't," I said. "The joint account," he said. "If you want to protect yourself, the simplest move is to stop adding to it. Open a separate savings account for your own contributions going forward. What's already in there is technically split equally, but if she withdraws unilaterally, you'd be looking at a civil claim to recover your half, which is expensive and slow. So the move is to stop contributing, not to withdraw," I said. "Correct. Don't trigger a visible disruption. Just redirect your contributions somewhere they're under your control." "The property," I said, "when we buy. If you're contributing more to the deposit, which from what you're telling me, you will be, document that and get it reflected in a declaration of trust. You can specify unequal beneficial shares without changing the mortgage structure. It needs to be filed with the land registry to be enforceable." "And the insurance," I said. "Your policy, your choice," he said. "Change the beneficiary nomination. You can do it online. Takes 15 minutes. I did all of these things over the course of the following 3 weeks. Quietly. No announcement. Nothing that would read, from the outside, as anything other than routine financial administration. And I stopped directing my monthly savings contribution to the joint account. I set up a separate account in my name only and rerouted the standing order. The joint account was left where it was. I didn't touch what was already in it. But it stopped growing on my side. The guarantor paperwork came up again in a conversation with Isolda about 2 weeks later. Rowena had been pressing for it. The loan terms were favorable. The studio needed new equipment. There was a moment in the business cycle to expand. Isolda presented it to me over dinner in a way that assumed my yes was still in place, that we were just handling logistics. I said, "I've thought about it more. I can't do it." She looked up from her plate. "What?" "The guarantor arrangement," I said. "I'm not going to sign the papers." "Why not?" "Because if the loan goes into default, and I'm liable for the debt, and I don't have full visibility into how the studio is being run." "You have me?" she said. "You can ask me anything." "I know," I said, "but the person making the major strategic decisions for the studio isn't only you." She was quiet for a moment. "This is about my mother. It's about the financial risk I'm being asked to carry for a business where I don't have complete information," I said. "If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, I'm the one carrying the debt." "She's not going to run my business into the ground," Isolde said. "I didn't say she would," I said. "I said I don't have full information. I'm not willing to guarantee a loan in that situation." "Callum, I've decided," I said. "I'm sorry if that's a problem." She didn't say anything else about it that night. She called her mother the following morning. I heard the call through the wall. Isolde's voice lower than usual, more careful. Later, Rowena's position arrived via Isolda. She thought I was being controlling. My refusal to support the studio was, in Rowena's interpretation, a sign of my attitude toward Isolda's independence. This was, I noted, an interesting reframe. I had declined to put my own finances at risk. This had been translated, through the Rowena interpretation system, into an act of control over someone else. "I'm sorry she feels that way," I said when Isolde relayed this. "That's it?" Isolde said. "That's it," I said. "There are things you learn to stop spending energy on. The wedding happened. It was larger than I'd wanted and smaller than Rowena had wanted. I know which in the universe where Rowena's preferences served as the ceiling was probably the definition of compromise. The day itself was, I want to be honest here, genuinely good. Isolde was radiant in the specific way of people who are both happy and present. And I was present too. And the things we said to each other in front of the people we loved were things we meant. There were people in that room who loved us, and I felt it. And I don't want to talk about that day as though it was only the beginning of something bad. It had real weight in it. It was real. What I noticed on the day, Rowena gave a speech. It was long. It was primarily about Isolda, her childhood, her resilience, her father's memory, the hopes Rowena had for her daughter's future. I was mentioned twice, briefly, and in ways that were warm in phrasing and evaluative in feel, like I had passed a test rather than like I was loved. More tellingly, Rowena appeared in almost every photograph. Not obtrusively, she wasn't elbowing people out of the frame. She simply materialized in the way of someone who has a practiced instinct for centrality. In the album we eventually had printed, there were more photographs of Isolda and Rowena than there were of Isolda and me. I noticed. I filed it. I said nothing. The first year of marriage had a texture I'm going to try to describe with accuracy. There were stretches, weeks at a time, that were genuinely good. The life we had built had real substance. We had found an apartment we both loved and made an offer on it. I had structured the purchase, per Elliot's advice. Well, with a declaration of trust that reflected my larger deposit contribution, I had put in 65% of the deposit to Isolde's 35%, and I had specified this in writing with our conveyancer and filed it with the land registry. Isolda had signed the documentation without fully reading it, which told me something about how much she was thinking about these arrangements. But that is a separate observation. We traveled twice that year. We had dinners with friends where the evenings were easy and the conversation was good. We had ordinary evenings that were quiet and real. But Rowena was always present. Not physically, not always, but her influence moved through Isolda like a current. You'd notice it in the decisions that arrived already made, in the plans that shifted for reasons attributed to logistics but traceable to accommodation. In the particular way Isolde would sometimes look at me after getting off the phone, not guilty exactly, but recalibrated. The Christmas incident defined the second year for me. We had agreed explicitly to split the holidays. Christmas with my family, New Year with hers. It was our first married Christmas. My parents were older, and I'd become more aware over the preceding year of what it meant to not take the ordinary things for granted. I was looking forward to it in the way that surprises you. That quiet pull toward a family table that you'd almost talked yourself out of caring about. 2 weeks before Christmas, Rowena announced she wasn't well. Nothing specific. Fatigue, low mood, difficulty sleeping. She needed Isolde nearby. I asked the holidays were hard since Isolde's father died. It would mean a great deal. Isolda came to me on a Wednesday evening. I knew what was coming by the way she sat down at the kitchen table, by the way she folded her hands in front of her. "My mom needs me this Christmas," she said. I looked at her for a moment. "We had an agreement," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry, but she's not well." "She's been not well every time a plan involves me," I said. Isolda's expression shifted. "That's not fair." "I'm asking you to look at the pattern," I said. "Not just this instance. The pattern." "She lost my dad," Isolda said, and I could hear the grief in it, hers as much as Rowena's. "She gets lonely at Christmas. Is it so terrible to want to be with her?" "I want to be with my family," I said. "We made an arrangement, but you agreed to it." "I know I agreed," she said. The frustration in her voice was real. Some of it was directed at herself, and I could hear that, which almost made it worse. "But I can't leave her alone." "You're leaving me to go alone," I said. I went to my family's Christmas without my wife. It was fine, my family was warm, my niece and nephew were loud, the food was good. But there was a specific moment, Christmas morning, watching my brother put his arm around his wife while they watched their children open presents, when something in me went very still. Not with sadness, with clarity. Isolda came back on the 2nd of January. She was apologetic. She had brought gifts from her mother, a bottle of wine, a candle. She said her mother was feeling much better and was grateful for the visit. I thanked her for the gifts. I put them on the shelf. I didn't drink the wine. I started keeping records in January of the new year. This is the part that people, when they hear it, sometimes describe as calculating. I understand why it sounds that way. But I want to explain what I was actually doing and why. I had spent approximately 2 years giving my best interpretation to a situation that kept declining to improve. I had communicated honestly and without hostility. I had not issued ultimatums. I had been patient in the specific way I was raised to be patient, quietly and for a long time, and I had watched the situation remain structurally unchanged. What I was doing in January was simply creating an accurate record of what our life actually looked like, as distinct from what I was being told it looked like. I started a private document, password protected, all stored on a personal drive not connected to any shared account. I began logging significant incidents, dates, what had been said, what had been agreed to, what actually happened. I also began keeping financial records I had previously kept only loosely, contributions to shared expenses, transfers into the joint account, larger personal expenditures I had made for the household and for Isolde's benefit specifically. This was not paranoia, it was evidence hygiene. In my profession, the principle is simple. If you think a position might become contested, document it before the contest begins. You build the record while the record is still clean, before anyone knows you're building it. In the commercial world, I had watched people lose positions they'd earned and deserved simply because they hadn't documented them. Yet I had watched disputes dissolve in the face of good records and escalate disastrously without them. I was applying professional discipline to a personal situation. The principle didn't change because the context was domestic. Over the course of 3 months, the document grew to 47 entries. I read it back one evening with a glass of whiskey and found it striking. Not for any individual entry, which could always be argued away in isolation, but for the cumulative picture. The pattern was clear and consistent, and without exception. Plans made, plans broken, reasons always traceable to Rowena, Isolda's position always deferential to her mother's, my position always the one that adjusted. There was also a financial dimension I hadn't quite seen until I laid it out in sequence. So in the 26 months since we'd been living together, I had contributed approximately 73% of our shared household expenses. This was partly proportional to the income gap between us. I earned meaningfully more, but it was more than proportional. The additional contribution had been something I'd absorbed without naming. When I named it and quantified it, it had a different quality. There were specific larger items. I had paid for a holiday that Rowena had joined without being invited by me. She had invited herself via Isolda 6 days before we were due to leave, and I had said nothing and paid for her accommodation because the alternative was an argument I'd decided wasn't worth it at the time. I had paid for repairs to Rowena's car when Isolda asked me to help. It's a word that has a specific meaning in families like this one. I had paid for a piece of studio equipment for Isolda's business when the loan she'd wanted, the one I declined to guarantee, had eventually fallen through due to credit history issues I hadn't been told about in advance. None of these had felt like demands in the moment. Each request had arrived wrapped in context that made refusal seem churlish, small, unloving. But laid out in sequence, they described something. A system that processed my resources consistently in one direction and that operated most smoothly when I didn't examine it. I also saw, when I looked at it this way, that I had cooperated with it. I'm not listing this to perform grievance. I'm listing it because it changed what I did next. The incident that broke things was, when I look back at it, not the largest incident. It wasn't even in the top 5, measured by disruption or by cost. It was a small thing. That's often how it goes. The last thing doesn't have to be the biggest thing. It just has to be the one that comes after you've run out of a particular quality of patience. It was a Tuesday in March of the 3rd year. Isolda had been working late all week. A large project, genuinely demanding real deadline pressure. The kind of week where she came home tired in a way that was honest, and I didn't question it. I had been managing dinner and the apartment and my own work. I had booked a restaurant for Friday evening, a place a friend had been recommending for months, hard to get a reservation at. I'd put the booking in 3 weeks earlier. It was meant to be a reset, 2 hours of good food and space. On Thursday afternoon, Isolda texted me to say her mother had asked if she could come over Friday. I read the text 3 times. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment and did nothing but breathe. Then I called her. "I've had this reservation for 3 weeks," I said. "I know," she said. "You know?" "She asked yesterday," Isolde said. "She said she'd had a bad week. I told her we had plans. And she said she'd just been hoping to see me. That's all. She didn't push. But you're telling me about it," I said. A pause. "I'm telling you," Isolda said, "because I thought you should know." "You thought I should know," I said slowly. "Or you're hoping I'll tell you to cancel." Silence. "Which is it?" I said. "I don't know," she said. And I heard something in that, not deception, but exhaustion. She genuinely didn't know. Well, she was caught in the mechanism and couldn't see it as a mechanism because she was inside it. In a different version of this story, that exhaustion might have cracked something open. We might have had a real conversation. A hard one, a necessary one, and something might have finally moved. But I had heard the exhaustion before. I had had versions of the real conversation. Nothing had moved. "Go to your mother," I said. "Callum, I mean it," I said. "Go. I don't want to cancel the—" "I'll cancel it," I said. "You go." She started to say something else. I ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand. Then I opened the private document on my personal drive and added the entry. Date, context, exact words as I could recall them. Then I called Elliot. "I think I know where this is going," I said. "How long have you known?" "A while," I said. "What do you want to do?" "I want to stop losing things," I said. There was a pause on his end. Then, "Tell me what you've got." Over the following 6 weeks, I completed what I would describe as a comprehensive restructuring of my financial position. I'll describe this in precise detail because it's the part that mattered most when everything eventually came apart. The first step was the joint account. The money in it, approximately £19,000, roughly 12 of which had come from my contributions and 7 from Isolda's based on my records, was technically split 50-50 legally, but in practice whoever moved first would hold the position. I didn't withdraw it. What I did was build the documentation. Bank statements, standing order records, asset transaction histories covering the full period since the account had been opened. I organized these chronologically and stored them in the same folder on my personal drive as the incident log. I wasn't planning to sue anyone. I was building the architecture of a position that could, if necessary, be argued cleanly. The second step was the property. We had bought the apartment the previous year. The declaration of trust was already in place. 65-35 in my favor, filed with the land registry. I had Elliot confirm that it was properly executed and registered. It was. That meant in any property settlement, my stake was documented, specific, and legally protected. No retrospective negotiation possible. Third was the life insurance. I changed the primary beneficiary from Isolda to a discretionary trust I set up with Elliot's help. A simple structure, my brother as trustee, clean and straightforward. This took about 45 minutes from start to finish, including a call with the insurer. Fourth was the pension. I had a defined contribution pension through Hargrove. I had listed Isolde as my nominated beneficiary when we married. I submitted a change of nomination to the pension administrator, removing her name, listing my estate as the interim holding position. It could be updated later. The point was to stop the default. These things accumulate meaning when you don't pay attention to them. And fifth, the one that required the most care, was the studio loan. What most people didn't know, including people who knew us well, was that I had lent Isolda's studio £14,000 approximately 8 months after the wedding. It had been presented as bridge financing. A large client payment was delayed. She needed to cover staff costs and a supplier invoice. It would be back within a month. The client payment had cleared about 3 weeks later. The $14,000 had never come back. I don't believe Isolda withheld it maliciously. I believe it was absorbed into the category of Callum's contribution to our shared life and filed there, where it sat without generating obligation. That is a specific kind of carelessness, not a specific kind of deception. But I had a text thread, a WhatsApp exchange from the evening she'd asked for it, in which she had used the word loan twice and I had used it once, and in which I had confirmed the transfer. And I had the bank records. The documentation existed, clear and unambiguous, without me having done anything to create it. It had simply happened the way honest conversations between people who trust each other happen in the moment before trust became something I needed to account for. I showed Elliot the thread. "This is recoverable," he said. "Not without some friction, but recoverable. The language is explicit enough." "I'm not looking to recover it right now," I said. "I just want to know it's in the file." He added it to what we were assembling. What I was building across those 6 weeks was not a weapon. I want to be precise about that. It was a position, a documented, organized, defensible position that meant if the relationship ended, I would not end it having lost everything twice over. Once in the relationship itself, and once in the financial settlement of it. There is a version of wisdom that says, protecting yourself in a relationship signals distrust, and that signaling distrust is what kills relationships. I used to carry some version of this. I don't anymore. What I believe now is that the instinct to protect yourself, when it arrives with real force, is information. It arrives because something real is happening. Ignoring it in the name of romantic faith is not a virtue. It is a specific form of self-abandonment, and it has a cost. I had stopped abandoning myself. What happened next happened in April, over 3 days, and the sequence of it still has a particular texture when I run through it. On the first day, Rowena called the apartment landline while I was working from home. Isolda was at the studio. Rowena didn't know I was in. She started talking before she'd confirmed who had picked up. "She should not be spending her earnings on his family," she said. "You have your own life to build. You don't owe them—" "Rowena," I said. A pause. "Callum," she said. "I thought you'd be at work." "I'm working from home," I said. "What were you saying just now? About earnings and family?" A very specific silence. "I was referring to a conversation Isolda and I had," she said, "about family contributions. It doesn't concern you." "I think," I said, "it concerns me quite directly." She thanked me for passing the message on, which was not what I'd said I would do, and ended the call. The conversation she had been referencing, I discovered that evening, was one Isolda and I had had 2 weeks prior about contributing to my parents' anniversary trip. As my brother and I were organizing a contribution toward a holiday for them. 40 years together, a meaningful gesture. I had mentioned it to Isolda in the context of our shared finances. Isolda had mentioned it to Rowena. Rowena had formed an opinion that I was directing Isolda's money toward my family and had been calling to advise her daughter against it. Without, as it happened, knowing I was home. I told Isolda when she got back from the studio what had happened. She went still. "She knew I was home by the time she adjusted," I said. "But I heard what she was saying before she adjusted. Did you tell her about the money I'm putting toward my parents' anniversary?" "I mentioned it," Isolde said. "She's my mother, Callum. I tell her things. You tell her everything," I said. "You tell her every financial decision we make. And you tell her every time I ask you to hold something back. You tell her things I've said in private, and then she calls and tells me what I should be doing with my own money. She was trying to look out for me. She was trying to undermine me," I said. Quietly, not loudly, and you gave her the material. Isolda's face worked through something complicated. "That's not fair." "I've stopped being interested in fair," I said. "I'm interested in what's actually happening." We didn't shout. We were both controlled, which in some ways made it worse. Controlled arguments leave room for denial. She apologized about the call. She said she'd talked to her mother about privacy. She said she understood why I was upset. None of it was a lie. None of it was what I needed. On the second day, I came across a message on Isolda's laptop, which she'd left open on the kitchen counter while she was getting changed. I wasn't looking. I was passing through. The screen was on and a message thread was visible. I want to be careful here. I read the first few lines before I understood what I was looking at. And then I read the rest, because what I'd already seen meant I needed to see the whole thing. The thread was from 2 weeks prior. Rowena had sent, "If you're thinking about the future, you need to understand your position. The apartment. Is his name first on the title? Find out what share is legally yours." Isolda's reply was, "I'll find out." I read it twice. Then I walked away from the kitchen counter and went to my office and sat at my desk and was quiet for about 15 minutes. The appointment with the land registry, the declaration of trust I had filed, the one specifying 65 to 35 in my favor, had been properly executed and registered for nearly 12 months. Whatever Isolda found out when she found it out, she was going to find the documented truth. I added the message thread to the record, word for word. On the third day, I had the conversation I had been preparing for since January. I made dinner. I opened wine. When Isolda came home from the studio, I gave her space to decompress. She'd had a difficult day with a demanding client, and I let the evening settle before I said what I was going to say. After dinner, I said, "I want to talk to you about where we are." She looked at me. She knew the register of this kind of conversation. We'd had versions of it before. And I could see her preparing for the version where we identified the problem, agreed on intentions, and then deferred the resolution. "I'm not going to do the version where we agree to try harder," I said. She was quiet. "I've been trying harder for 2 years," I said. "I've said what I needed. I've adjusted. I've been patient in the specific way I was raised to be patient, quietly, and for a long time." "Callum, I'm not finished," I said. "I read the messages on your laptop. I'm not going to pretend I didn't." She went very still. "I know your mother has been asking you about the apartment," I said, "about the ownership structure. I know because I read the messages, and I also know because the pattern of what's been happening had already told me the direction she was moving. I wasn't going to... I don't know what you were going to do," I said. "I know what has been happening. Your mother has been running a campaign, carefully and consistently since the evening I met her, to position herself as the authority on whether I belong in your life. She has been doing it through your access, using information you gave her, and you have allowed it. You have placed her preferences above our plans, her interpretation above my words, her presence above our time." Isolda's eyes were wet. I noted it and kept going. "I am not angry," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I understand how this happened. Your father died. Your mother leaned on you in a way that reorganized the entire structure of your life. By the time I arrived, the structure was already set. I'm not asking you to not love your mother. I'm asking you to choose your marriage." "I have chosen." "You haven't," I said. "Not when it mattered, not once in 2 years when the choice was real." She was crying now, but I gave her a moment. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying I think we need to separate," I said. "And I'm saying it now. Clearly, before it gets more complicated than it already is." The words sat in the room between us with real weight. I wasn't impervious to it. "You want to leave?" she said. "I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about whether this can change," I said. "Because I've been honest with myself, and I don't believe it can. Not without a change I haven't seen evidence you're willing to make." "I can change," she said. "I can talk to her." "You've said that," I said. "Many times." Something in her face moved through grief and through something else. A recognition, I think. Not of unfairness, of accuracy, of the kind of accuracy that lands differently than accusation because it doesn't need to be argued with. "I love you," she said. "I know," I said. "I love you too, that's not in question." "But you're leaving." "I'm choosing not to keep losing," I said. We talked for 2 more hours. I was present in that conversation, not managing it, not performing calm, genuinely present. Isolda said things that cost her something to feed. She said she thought if we'd had children, she would have been different. She said she'd always known, somewhere under the surface, that her mother took too much. She said she was sorry. I heard the apology. I didn't soften. The practical matters began the following week. because I had done what I'd done. The financial documentation, the asset structuring, the careful months of preparation. The separation was cleaner than it might otherwise have been. I moved out of the apartment. The declaration of trust, when we already filed, meant the ownership proportions were documented and beyond retrospective dispute. The flat sold 11 months later. The proceeds were divided according to the trust document. I received 65%. This was not a windfall. It was my own money, tracked and protected, returned to me. The joint savings account was the subject of a brief conversation. With the bank records I had assembled showing my contributions precisely, I made a clean case for my proportional share. Isolda didn't contest it. I think she was tired, and I think some part of her understood that the records would hold. We withdrew our respective portions and closed the account. The £14,000 loan, the informal one, documented in text messages and bank transfers, I raised once with Elliot on the phone. Isolde went quiet when I mentioned it. After a pause, she said she hadn't thought of it as a loan. I said I understood that, and that I had the message thread if there was any question. We agreed on a repayment schedule. She honored it. The last payment arrived 7 months later. The guarantor arrangement had never been signed. That line had held from the beginning. The insurance and pension nominations had been changed months before any of this. There was nothing to renegotiate there. When I tallied the whole picture, the property stake preserved, the joint savings protected, the loan recovered, the guarantor liability avoided, the number was significant. Not life-changing by itself, but it was mine. I had built it over years of careful work, and I had kept it. And in the arithmetic of a life, it had a weight beyond its face value. But it was evidence that I had not been disassembled. Isolda's framing of what had happened emerged over the weeks that followed, through mutual friends and through a brief period of intermittent contact about practical matters. The framing was, I had left. More specifically, I had left when things got hard. I had not been willing to handle the complexity of a relationship with a difficult extended family. I had been cold and calculating. I had planned my exit while pretending to be committed. This reached me in fragments. A friend who'd spoken to Isolda. A message from her cousin that I didn't respond to. A moment at a mutual friend's birthday where I became aware the room had a version of this story already in it. I didn't argue with it. I didn't circulate a counter-narrative. I didn't send anyone the 47-entry document. Though the temptation visited me once or twice. I did nothing. This is not weakness. This is a specific strategic choice, and it is the one I would make again every time. When someone constructs a narrative in which you are the villain, the most powerful response is almost never direct refutation. Direct refutation pulls you into the story as a reactive character. It concedes the frame. It signals that the narrative has the power to disturb you, and disturbance is what the narrative feeds on. My only response to it was to keep being exactly who I was without modification. I kept my head down at Hargrove. I got a promotion 7 months after the separation, a position I had been working toward for 2 years, which arrived quietly and increased my responsibility and my compensation meaningfully. I told Elliot over steak and good wine. I told almost nobody else. I went to my parents for Christmas that year. My brother's children were louder than the year before, and his wife had made something with pastry that nobody could explain exactly. My mother made the remark she always makes about how I should eat more, which is her version of saying she's glad. There. I stayed 3 nights. I thought about Isolda sometimes. That's honest, and I'm not going to dress it as otherwise. I thought about the version of the life we might have had if things had been arranged differently. If Rowena had been a different person, or if Isolde had been made differently by a different set of circumstances. I wasn't free of the loss, but I wasn't consumed by it either. I had converted it into other things. Into the careful record-keeping, into a professional precision that was getting me noticed, into a clearer understanding of what I would and wouldn't accept going forward. Rowena I thought about less. What I thought, when I did think about her, was something close to pity. Not generous pity, not the forgiving kind, just the flat observation that she would probably spend the rest of her life not understanding what she'd done or what it had cost her daughter. She had wanted centrality. She had achieved centrality. And now she had her daughter back, unshared. And the question of whether that was what she'd actually wanted was one only she could answer. That was its own kind of loss. I wasn't responsible for it. There was a moment, about 8 months after the separation, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Isolda. New number. Deliberately, had I understood, the use of it as a way through a screen she assumed I directed. I just wanted to say, she said, that I know it wasn't all your fault. I said nothing. I know I made choices, she said. I've been in therapy since the summer. I'm working on it. I'm glad, I said. I'm not asking to, she started. I know, I said. A pause. You were right, she said, about most of it. I didn't add anything to that. There was nothing I needed to add. Take care of yourself, I said. You too, she said. I ended the call. I sat with the phone for a moment, the way I had done many times over the course of this story, sitting with a phone in a room that was quiet. Then I put it down and went back to what I was doing. I was making coffee. The morning had a clean, unremarkable quality to it. Pale light through the window. The particular silence of a space that belongs fully to you. Later, through a chain of mutual acquaintances, Rowena's version of events reached me. According to that account, I had been a difficult man. I had never accepted her. My leaving had broken her daughter's heart, and the reason for it was my own emotional limitations. I sat with the phone after reading that too. I thought about the document, all 47 entries organized by date with attachments. I thought about the text thread with the word loan in it, sitting in a folder on a personal drive. I thought about the declaration of trust at the land registry, filed and numbered and beyond dispute. I didn't open any of it. The thing about a record is that its power isn't contingent on whether anyone else sees it. The power is in the fact that it exists. It is in the fact that when you sit down and write the truth of something carefully and completely, you become unable to tell yourself a more comfortable version of it. The document had never been a weapon. It had been a mirror. I had looked into it enough times that I knew exactly what I'd seen, and exactly what I'd done, and exactly what I'd been worth, both in what I'd given and in what I'd protected. I was not the villain of Rowena's story. I was just a man who had declined to be edited out of his own. I got up. I rinsed the coffee cup. I had a meeting at Hargrove at 9, and I wanted to walk in the way I'd started walking in since the promotion, unhurried, clear about what I knew, carrying only what was mine. Outside, the morning was cold and clean, the kind of morning where you can see further than usual. I didn't look back.